All right, we will get started.
So today we're going to start doing a little bit of PowerPoint prep. So we're using this, or part of this seminar and seminars from SESLIC at UIUC because it covers things fairly well, and why put effort into it when we have permission to just use his stuff. I will warn you, he likes monkeys. I don't know why. There are monkeys everywhere in this thing. I've cut out some of them. So a couple of things about the seminar first, and then talking more about slide design. So when you are putting your talk together, you obviously want to start thinking about what your audience comes to the talk with. So what do they know? What is the one or two things that you want the audience to walk away from your seminar with? You're not going to be able to get 17 points across. They'll forget all of them. So focus on one. As we said last time, make sure that you do your best to get the audience on board very quickly. Otherwise, they will tune out. For this seminar, it's definitely a good idea to pitch your talk correctly. It's always a good idea to pitch your talk at the right level. Here, we're pitching basically at sort of senior level undergraduates in chemistry. So that means you probably will end up covering a little bit more than you would were you just pitching it to faculty. And in general, as it says, it's generally better to be a little bit low on the level of technical detail or assumed knowledge than leave everybody in the dust. Delivery will vary a little bit so that you don't come across as like, this is an electron, right? We don't want to be condescending, but we do also not want to leave the audience behind. Thinking about organization, we talked about this last week or on Monday as well. We want to think of it as a story, a beginning and a middle and an end, and not just a series of facts. Usually having graphics first when you're putting your slides together will help orient you. So you'll have graphs obviously from your article. You can put those in and then structure around that how you want to talk about it. Repetition is going to be beneficial. So tell people once, and then tell them again, and then tell them what you told them. So your introduction, the bulk of your talk, your conclusion will help reinforce those points. Some people like to provide an outline. You will probably want one when you're putting your talk together. You can have one in the seminar, but you don't necessarily need one. There are plenty of presentations that don't have them. If you do have an outline in it, make sure that it does not have like 75 bullet points in it, because that will eat up a lot of time and people don't care, right? They're sitting in the talk, they're going to see it. Where it's useful is it does a little bit of foreshadowing for your story, where things are going, so people know what's coming next, but make sure that if it's an outline, it's a broad outline. So that's, if you're going to do subdivisions for your bullets, one is probably not great. Flow is going to be very important. Part of that will come out of practice. You will have to see how things work. That's part of why we have a mentor practice and an instructor practice, to see how things go. And if you want to call out specific slide divisions, that's fine. If that fits into your presentation, you don't have to. So for example, we'll have a couple coming into this. How many? As many as you need. That depends on a lot of things. In general, low content, lots of low content slides, so not very busy. It works better. Certainly, it depends on how much information density. It depends on how long you spend on each slide. Ideally, we have one main idea per slide. And the benchmark is kind of 2 minutes per slide, but it really varies. If you have a graph that you really need to unpack, that could be 4 minutes maybe. It would be a lot, right? For your motivation, it might only be 40 seconds if you can go through 3 bullet points in a pretty picture quickly. We'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about slide design, but this is a moderately sized room. Dr. Walters likes to sit in the back corner, so you will want to make sure that things are sized appropriately for people sitting in the back. The slides serve a couple of purposes. Visual interest, certainly, because we like to see things. They are going to be prompts for you, so that you don't have to walk in here and just talk for 25 plus or minus 3 minutes on science. So you can be reminded about what to say next from the slide. But you don't want to have giant text. You want brief prompts that remind you what to say, and then you say it. It's not the full article, right? And a lot of these you're going to have to cut. You want to inform, you want to convince, you don't need to put everything on the screen. So we're telling the story. You don't have to present all the data. You can put all of your supporting data if you think you might need it after your references, and then if questions come up, you can refer to it and look all smart. But probably won't go in the actual presentation. Because articles are meant to archive and they often have either page limits or stupid fees for the number of figures you have, a lot of figures cram 16 different things into a single figure. So like panels A through F, there's 0 white space. That's great for an article because it's condensed and you can linger over that and you can get out the magnifying glass. For your presentation, that's probably not good because that's going to muddle the single point that you want to get out of that graph. So simplify where you can, cover it up with white space, cut things out. So long as you don't alter the data, you can change the way the graph is displayed. Not a problem. So there's a slide for a division break. Talking about the actual presentation, landscape is standard. I don't know if you can even do portrait presentations anymore. Most of the projectors in the chemistry building are the new 16:9 widescreen format. This one is a widescreen format, but you may or may not see it. This presentation is from 2009 when 4:3 was standard. So there is a good chunk of unused space on the side of those. So I would recommend, if you know that your projector is going to be widescreen, go ahead and start your presentation building in widescreen. That gives you just a little bit more space to work with. You want to avoid making it in 4:3 and then converting it midway through, because then PowerPoint's going to move all of your stuff around a little bit. You'll have to readjust it. You want to use the page well. You want it to be filled but not overfilled, so not cluttered. You want to use white space very strategically. So you can use white space to call out important things. You can use it to demarcate different aspects of the slide, so to separate topics and ideas. You can use it to make things a little bit more visible. When people are writing these, usually they start out by making sure that they get absolutely everything down on the slide that they want, which is great for practice, but you're reading that for the most part now and not listening to what I'm saying, right? Also, that gets really hard to read. So don't do that. Fonts, sizing, there's no hard and fast rule, but these are standard kind of benchmarks for those. Serif fonts are not as good as sans serif. So serif is the little dangly bit on the edge of the T, or the things down there. So sans serif without serifs. The serifs can get a little bit confusing if you're very far away, so sans is better. Just don't use Comic Sans because it's ugly. So Arial's a common one. The default in PowerPoint, I think, is Calibri, which is sans serif, so that's fine. Don't change fonts too often because it gets weird. More benchmark font sizes. Caps are hard to read fast. Plus, it sounds like I'm shouting at you, which you probably don't want. So don't use those. And don't go overboard with the cute stuff, right? If you're doing divisions between paragraphs within a text box, you want to leave a little bit of space. Apparently he likes 1.1 line spacing with some of those. They're defaults now. Spell check, because in particular, PowerPoint does not understand science. So your sciencey words, it may not flag, which means it'll look like they're misspelled, which means you stop paying attention to the little red squiggly line under things, which means you miss obvious misspellings. Also worry about homonyms. You want to be consistent with punctuation. So either put periods at the end of statements or bullets, or don't. Generally, if you use full sentences, obviously full sentences should be punctuated. If you use phrases, those don't need punctuation. But ultimately, we're trying to minimize distraction from the audience, right? We want the audience to focus on the message of the presentation. We want the audience to divide their attention between what's on the slide that the presenter is talking about and the presenter themselves. We don't want them looking at the slide going, man, that looks weird. But that's just sets my teeth on edge, right? Because then they're not listening. Hanging indents are typically more readable. That's a default. Then first line indentation, that's going the way of the dinosaur anyway. Backgrounds, you can do colorful backgrounds, but remember, we want to minimize distraction. So ghost text is bad. Different colors, let that fade out so it's easier to see. Colored backgrounds can be great, but you need to be careful because they can reduce the contrast a little bit. Clear unshaded usually is better, and I would advise you strongly to sneak in here before your actual presentation and make sure that things look okay on the projector, because screen, and in particular these projectors, have very different colors these days.
What is a clear unshaded background?
That.
White.
White. You could do straight up colors. So you could do, I think we get some examples. Other colors are fine. You need to worry about text and other images, so keeping the contrast good. Bullets can get tedious. Don't use the fun ones. Don't use the little dash guy. Again, don't distract your audience. You can't do this anymore because Microsoft killed clip art because it's stupid and adds absolutely nothing to your talk. I mean, there is a wizard looking through a telescope. What does that have to do with anything? No. I had some white space. I felt the need to put something there. Think more about it. You can put something useful in there. Color is great. You can use it to emphasize things. You can use it to help the audience keep track of stuff. So if you have two molecules that your paper makes, molecule 53 and molecule 72. I don't remember what 53 is, but if I know that 53, every time I see it, and the results associated with it are red, that helps me distinguish between it and 72, which might be blue. So you can use it to emphasize, you can use it for consistency to help link things in your audience's mind. Apparently he doesn't like pastels. Whatever. A lot of things you can colorize if you want for graphs. So if you have black and white graphs, you're welcome to paint over those. You want to avoid going overboard on text. Yellow on white, yellow on anything but black is terrible and unreadable. Black on blue is unreadable. Some of the dark backgrounds, yellow on black, red, maybe green, you also want to be cognizant of colorblind people, so try to avoid having molecule 53 being red and 72 being green, because those are both gray. So try to distinguish those. Primary colors seem to be fairly common, so red, blue, black. And don't get cute. So, yeah, animations can be very useful. In particular, we can use them to keep the audience with us. They can add visual interest, but PowerPoint has lots of really stupid animations that it will let you do. And that's not even as stupid as they can get, because you can add sounds. But you shouldn't, because that wouldn't be cute. That would just be dumb and distracting. When you're in here, obviously we've talked a little bit about font sizes, but it's sometimes hard to see that when you're working on a laptop. You are always going to be very close to it, and so your 12-point or 10-point font is going to look easily readable on that slide, and you get in here and it's going to be completely invisible. So one quick and dirty way to check things is basically make your presentation the size of your entire fist. So either back away from the computer or just zoom out from your slide until you can occlude it with your fist, and that's a good representation of how big it will be. Yeah. We talked about that a little bit. We don't want long, complete, complex sentences, because then you will read the graph or you will read the slide as an audience member while I'm reading the slide, and guess what? You can read faster than I can, so you will get bored very, very quickly from my reading it. We want to try and simplify comprehension, so that's going to be one idea per line. We don't want to cram a bunch of stuff in there. We want to avoid distraction again by trying to avoid weird line breaks. We can think of dividing the presentation into a couple of different slides. This is probably a little bit more structured than I would consider useful. Text-only slides, you may have some, but they're not great necessarily. For a conclusion, certainly, maybe I could see that. They tend to show up in introductions a little bit, but that can get a little dry. You'll have plenty of graphs. You probably won't see much more from your papers other than X, Y, and bars. Tables are deadly. Tables are great for papers because lots of sig figs, lots of detail, but that is a lot of reading for the audience to do. So if you can, either zoom in on parts of it or make a graph out of it, right? You've got time, tables of numbers, you can turn those into nice graphs that you can show. Cartoons, conceptual cartoons, actually I think are very useful if you can come up with them. For axes, you always want to label those. That can be a challenge, or that can be something to remember when you are slicing and dicing figures from your article. So you may have to add your own axes. You may have to add your own axes anyway so that they are legible. So you can always overwrite an axis title to make it clearer, to make it easier to understand, to make it bigger. 1980 circa 3D graphs are not very good. Who knew? So we'll skip those. Like I said, you can always color your own. So you can do that in PowerPoint just by dropping colored rectangles on top of a shaded bar graph. You want to use, if you can, if you're making your own, bigger fonts, obviously, for your own graphs, lines that you can see from the back of the room, so not like a 0.7 point font. Legends are annoying because you have to do a lot of work with the legend. So if I'm looking at this point here, where the red one jumps way up, I have to go, let me back out so I can see it. So that's the red. So in my head, I have to go from this giant point up here over to east. Okay, that's east. What's that bigger than? Down to the green, and then I have to go over to north, and then that's bigger than the blue, which is up in the middle, and that's the west. So that's a lot of brain power, while the presenter has just moved on entirely. So if we can label the curves themselves, that's going to be a lot easier for your audience. And in this case, I might even label, instead of here on the edges, I might actually label them on around this point so that you can see all of them and where they are different. The other thing that's really helpful for your audience is you've spent 2 or 3 minutes talking about this graph and what it means. Add a single conclusion down at the bottom. So, and this is why, and then we move on. So there's a snazzy looking 3D plot. Micrographs you may find. That's probably overkill for what you're going to need detail-wise, but you always want to provide a scale bar. If you're cutting and chopping out of a larger figure, that scale bar may not be on every panel, so make sure that you put one on there so that we can see how big things are. We'll talk a little bit later about graphics and getting good graphics out from papers into presentations. You can have equations. You want to probably keep them a little bit simplified if you can. If you do have them, you want to make sure that you define all of your symbols. And if you can define your symbols in a fairly useful way, that would also be good, rather than just T is temperature and X is mole fraction and delta H is enthalpy. Try and wrap it into the story a little bit. Can you tell what I've been grading? And then, of course, pay extra attention as to how big the equation is with the standard scaling that PowerPoint does. Sometimes that's hard. So this is actually specific to us. Your title slide is going to have the article reference in ACS format. We will assume that everything that we see in the presentation that looks like data is from that article, unless we are told otherwise. So you do not have to reference figures from your article. You do not have to reference tables from your article. We will assume that that comes from your article. The flip side to that is if it's from somewhere else, we need to know. So if it is from a different source, data or figure, we want the citation on that slide. And a small abbreviated citation on the bottom of the slide is perfect for that. All of your references will go on your final slides, and those should all be in ACS format. The reference on the slide is helpful because we may, in the audience, see something in your presentation and go, oh, that's interesting. I want to know where that graph came from, right? That is pertinent to my interests. I want to know where it is. I would really like to be able to write down Jack's 2018 47 215. Very short citation that I can then go look at, not this is reference 6, and then wait until the end of your presentation. Try and grab reference 6 while you are like fainting from excitement about being over, and your reference slide is up for a total of about a microsecond. So we want those there. Question?
Oh, it was about like if we do those bottom of the slide citations, how to do them.
Yeah. So just the very abbreviated ones is fine. If you're pulling an image from somewhere else, we want a URL for that. A tiny one is fine. For images, usually it's there to demonstrate that you took it from somewhere and to give credit for that, basically, rather than passing it off as your own. Humor is great, but you need to be careful with it. That is reflective of your audience, but also you may not be as funny as you think. Visual humor usually works better. Your conclusion slide should present knowledge, not just repeat everything, but repeat it and then tie it back to the motivation a little bit. So that's telling them what you told them, and then 1, maybe 3 take-home messages that you want them to actually retain for a while. Keywords, not long sentences, yeah. You'll have acknowledgements, so spell it either way. Americans drop the E, Brits don't. Brief and to the point, so you want to thank people who helped with the presentation, who watched it, who gave you helpful, maybe technical information if you had questions, people who sat through it. I had someone thank their potted plants one year because that's apparently their audience for practice. And then let people know that you're actually done. Shut up and wait for questions. Speaking of questions. On that. All right, I'm going to stop integrity.